No one showed up the day my wife was rushed into the emergency room for the second time. At 2 in the morning, I was standing alone in a hospital hallway in Houston, a surgical consent form in my hand, damp with sweat. Sarah was lying behind that door. The doctor said the infection was progressing in a complicated way. I called my son 14 times. He answered once, just once, and the first thing he said was, "Dad, please don't put more pressure on Ava." Before I tell you what happened later that night, if you're listening to this somewhere out there, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me which city you're listening from. I read those messages. Every single one. And now, I'm going to tell you exactly what happened after that call. The hospital hallway felt colder than I expected, not because of the air conditioning, but because no one was standing beside me. I once designed aircraft components that could handle pressure at 10,000 meters, but no one ever trained me to stand still and watch the emergency room doors close in front of my face. Sarah was taken back in just a few hours after her hip replacement surgery. At first, the doctors said everything went according to procedure. By evening, her fever spiked fast. They used words like reaction, suspected infection, early intervention. I listened. I nodded. I signed the papers. For 40 years, I've been the one signing for the big decisions. I thought James would come. 3 hours of driving from Austin to Houston. That's not impossible. I've driven farther than that, just to attend a 40-minute parent-teacher meeting when he was in high school. By the time I made the 14th call, I wasn't expecting comfort. I just wanted to hear him say, "I'm on my way." But he didn't. He said Ava was stressed because of work pressure. He said they'd had a very difficult week. He said I should try to understand. I stayed quiet a few seconds longer than usual. At this age, you learn to steady your voice before you say something that might break a relationship. I said, "Your mom is in the emergency room." He answered, "You have insurance, Dad." The call ended in silence, not because of bad reception, but because I had nothing left to say. An hour later, I sat down on a plastic chair next to a vending machine. I opened my phone. Old habit of a father. Checking for unread messages. There were none. But I saw a photo. Ava had posted it on social media. She and James were raising glasses at a wine party. Warm lights, wide smiles. Crystal glasses catching the glow. The caption was 4 words, living every single moment. It had been posted 56 minutes earlier. I didn't comment. I didn't call back. I just sat there, listening to nurses' shoes passing by, listening to the faint beeping of heart monitors somewhere behind the wall. And I asked myself what I had missed over the past 32 years. I remembered the times James changed jobs and needed an advance, the deposits for apartments, the time Ava wanted a new car because image matters for her career. I didn't ask many questions. I believed helping your child was natural. Maybe I confused support with feeding dependence. Around 3 in the morning, a doctor stepped out. He said they had cleaned the infected area. They acted in time. "We'll monitor her closely for the next 24 hours, he said. His voice was steady, professional. I nodded. I didn't ask more. When you've lived long enough, you understand not every question has an immediate answer. They let me into recovery for a few minutes. Sarah lay still, her skin paler than usual. She's always been the stronger one in this family. She taught school for 30 years, stood in front of a classroom with a cold, even when she'd lost her voice. And now, she lay there, dependent on glowing machines. I held her hand. It was still warm. I whispered, "I'm here." I didn't mention James. I didn't want to bring another disappointment into a room already heavy enough. When I stepped back into the hallway, I realized something. What hurt the most wasn't the absence. It was the choice. My son chose to stay at the party. He saw the missed calls. He heard my voice, and he still chose to raise his glass. I sat down again. This time I didn't open my phone. I thought about the savings funds I started for him when he was 18, the apartment under my name to help them get a good start. I thought about something Sarah once told me. Don't do for him what he needs to learn to do himself. Maybe we were too afraid of watching our child stumble. At 4 in the morning, the hospital grew quieter. Through the glass window, I saw the Houston sky beginning to pale. A new day was coming. I knew when Sarah woke up, she would ask, "Where's James?" I didn't know what I would say, but I knew one thing more clearly than ever. A parent's love can be wide and deep, but it cannot replace an adult's responsibility. And for the first time in many years, I wondered whether I had been protecting my family or quietly damaging it with limitless tolerance. The recovery room doors remained closed. Inside, my wife was fighting to heal. Outside, I began to understand that another battle, quieter, but just as serious, was waiting for me ahead. That morning came slower than I expected. The Houston sunlight stretched through the tall glass windows of the hospital hallway, but inside me there was no feeling of a new day. I had been sitting there almost all night. When the nurse said Sarah was temporarily stable, I only nodded. Temporarily is a word that makes a man afraid to breathe too hard. Close to noon, my phone vibrated. James. I stepped into the stairwell to take the call. At this age, I don't like having private conversations in crowded places. His voice sounded normal, not rushed, not worried. Dad, I need you to wire $15,000. Urgent. I didn't answer right away. For a second, I thought he meant medical expenses. Maybe, finally, he was going to ask about his mom. But he kept talking before I could say a word. Ava found this therapy retreat in the Maldives. It's a great deal. We have to put down a deposit today or we'll lose the spot. I looked down at my shoes. They had been standing on hospital floors for hours, a thin layer of dust at the toes. I could hear a cart rolling somewhere behind me. I said, "Your mom just went through an infection procedure." A short silence. "I know," he said, "but you have insurance, Dad. And you and Mom aren't using all your retirement money anyway." I leaned back against the wall. I didn't get angry right away. Feelings move slower at my age, but when they arrive, they're heavier. "Your mom hasn't fully woken up yet," I said. James sighed. Like I was the one making things difficult. "Dad, don't make this more complicated. Ava's under a lot of stress. This trip could save our marriage. Don't you want me to be happy? I've heard a lot of reasons for money over the years. Starting a company, investing, paying off credit cards. But using his mother's surgery as the background for a vacation in the Maldives, that was new." I asked slowly. "Have you come to the hospital? You know we're busy. 3 hours of driving isn't simple. And there are doctors there anyway." That's when I understood. In his mind, being present for his parents could be postponed, but putting down a travel deposit could not. "I'm not sending the money," I said. The air shifted on the other end. "That's selfish, Dad. You always say family matters. Now I need help, and you're making excuses." I closed my eyes for a moment. I thought about my years working in aircraft maintenance. If one bolt was loose, I couldn't pretend it was fine just to keep a flight on schedule. I had to tighten it, or shut the system down. Family works the same way. "I'm not refusing because of the money," I said. "I'm refusing because of the timing." He let out a short laugh, one I barely recognized. "Your timing is always when I don't need it." The call ended abruptly. I stood there in the stairwell for a few minutes. I didn't feel insulted. I felt something else forming, something clearer. When I walked back into Sarah's room, her eyes opened. Still hazy, but she recognized me. "Did James come?" she asked softly. I sat down beside her bed. I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to burden her either. "He's busy with work," I said. "He called." She gave a small nod, and in her eyes, I saw something I didn't want to face. Disappointment, carefully hidden to protect our son. Sarah has always been softer than me. That afternoon, I stepped outside for some air. I sat in my car and opened our bank account on my phone. Engineer's habit. When something feels wrong, check the data. I reviewed the transfers from the past 2 years. Some were small and familiar. Rent support, car payments, temporary investments. But others, I didn't even remember agreeing to. A few withdrawals from the joint account James and I shared. Not large amounts each time, but repeated. I didn't jump to conclusions. I just made notes. When I returned, Sarah was asleep. I sat by the window and looked down at the parking lot. I thought about the Maldives, a distant island, blue water, beautiful photos online. I don't blame anyone for wanting to travel. I just don't understand how it becomes more urgent than holding your mother's hand after surgery. That evening, James texted, "Have you reconsidered?" I didn't answer right away. I watched Sarah breathing steadily. I listened to the monitor's consistent rhythm, and I asked myself, if I keep sending money, what comes next? Another trip, another investment, another reason I used to think sacrifice was the highest form of parental love. Maybe I was wrong. Some sacrifices don't build anything. They only extend a habit. I replied with one word. No. That was all. My phone rang again almost immediately. This time, I didn't answer. I sat quietly in that hospital room, and for the first time in many years, I did not try to fix my son's problem. Instead, I asked myself something more important. Did James truly need money, or had he simply grown used to me filling every gap? I knew the answer wouldn't be comfortable, and I also knew, if I wanted to protect what remained of my life with Sarah, I would have to look directly at the numbers, the paperwork, the truth. The next morning, when Sarah was more stable, I left the hospital for a few hours, not to transfer money, but to review everything I had once called help. The next morning, I didn't drive home. I went to the bank first. At this age, you learn that emotions can blur the truth. Numbers don't. They don't care if you're hurting or angry. They simply sit there exactly as they are. I sat in front of the screen with a senior staff member I've known for years. I told her I wanted to review the joint account James and I shared, not because I suspected anything. I said I just needed to update our financial plan after my wife's surgery. She pulled up the past 2 years of transactions. At first, everything looked normal. Transfers I clearly remembered. But when we filtered for online withdrawals, small repeated amounts began to appear. $2,300, $1,850, $3,100. Not large enough to raise alarm immediately, but steady enough to become significant. I asked to see the authentication details. Most were approved using the electronic signature registered years ago, when I added James to the account for convenience. I studied the dates. Some transactions were made while I was out of state, one even when I was in Florida looking at retirement property. I didn't jump to conclusions. I just took notes. After the bank, I went to my family attorney, the same man who helped me set up a trust fund for James when he turned 18. I never imagined I'd sit in that office, questioning my own son. He opened the trust file. James was allowed to withdraw funds at certain age, milestones, and access a portion for business, startup, or home purchase. But every withdrawal required my consent. The attorney looked at me over thin glasses. Have you signed any recent authorizations? I shook my head. We reviewed them together. Some electronic signatures matched the format, but the request timestamps didn't match my work schedule. There were confirmation emails I didn't remember reading. I asked him to print everything. Holding that stack of papers, I didn't feel angry. I felt cold. I returned to the hospital early afternoon. Sarah was more alert. She asked where I'd been. Taking care of a few things, I said. She looked at me longer than usual. We've been married 40 years. She knows when I'm thinking about something bigger than what I say out loud. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat in the waiting area with my laptop. I logged into an old email account, one I rarely use but still linked to the bank. There were several transaction confirmation notices I had ignored, assuming they were routine statements. I opened them one by one. The wording was standard, automated, but the login IP addresses weren't from my home. I documented everything. One more detail caught my attention. Many of the withdrawals from the joint account were transferred into a personal account under Ava's name. Not their shared household account, her personal one. I followed the trail further. From there, funds were sent overseas, smaller amounts, regular intervals. I sat still for a long time. I didn't rush to accuse Ava of deception, but a question began to take shape. Did James know? If he did, why was he still calling me for $15,000 to save his marriage? If he didn't, then what exactly was he living inside? The next morning, I went back to the bank and requested that James's online access to the joint account be temporarily suspended. I didn't make a scene. I simply said I wanted to review the structure. I also requested that all trust disbursements be paused until a full legal audit was completed. My attorney suggested the next step send a formal notice, requesting verification of the transactions within 30 days. I agreed. I wasn't looking to punish anyone. I just wanted the truth on the table. That afternoon, James called again. His voice was tighter this time. Did you lock the account? Temporarily, I said. What does that mean? It means I'm reviewing the transactions. There are a few things that need clarification. On the other end, I heard whispering. Probably Ava. James spoke quickly. Dad, you're overreacting. We just used the money for household expenses. I asked one question. Why was money from the joint account transferred into Ava's personal account? Silence. Longer than I expected. Then he said, Ava manages finances better than I do. I didn't raise my voice. Then let the bank verify that I replied. The call ended heavy. That night, sitting beside Sarah's bed, I told her part of the truth. Not all of it, but enough for her to understand this was no longer about a trip to the Maldives. This was about boundaries. There are things we call help. I told her quietly that slowly weaken our child. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment. What are you going to do? She asked. I won't cut him off, I said slowly. But I will tighten things. Years in engineering taught me something simple. When a system has a leak, you don't demolish the entire structure. You locate the breach, reinforce it, restore control. My family has a breach, and I've ignored it for too long. When I left the hospital that evening, I knew the next step wasn't just paperwork or signatures. I needed to face James and Ava in person, not over the phone, not through text. I would invite them to the house, under the dining room light, where every important family conversation has taken place. This time, I wouldn't prepare a wire transfer. I would prepare the truth. I chose Saturday night, not because it was special, but because I wanted them to have time to think before they came. I texted James, one short line Saturday night, dinner at the house. We need to speak clearly about the money. He replied almost immediately. Finally, you understand. I didn't correct him. The house in Houston was quieter than usual that evening. Sarah was still weak, but she insisted on sitting at the table. I told her she could rest upstairs. She shook her head. This is family, she said softly. I want to be there. I made a simple dinner. No wine, no ceremony, just soft yellow light and the steady ticking of the wall clock. James and Ava arrived 15 minutes late. Ava walked in first. Light perfume, sharp but controlled. She wore the same smile I'd seen in her social media photos. James followed his eyes, scanning the room. Dad, he said. Half warm, half guarded. Sit down, I replied. Dinner was short. No one ate much. James mentioned work. Ava talked about a new project. Sarah listened quietly. When I set my fork down, I knew it was time. I reviewed the accounts, I said. James leaned back. Ava crossed her arms, still composed. Good, Ava said. Then you understand why we need more support. I reached for the briefcase beside my chair. No dramatic gesture, just a stack of neatly printed papers. I understand more than I expected, I said. I slid the stack toward James. This is the transaction history for the past 2 years from the joint account. He flipped through a few pages, at first confident, then slower. It's all household spending, he said. Is Ava's personal account household spending? I asked calmly. Ava responded immediately. What are you implying I'm not implying? I said. I'm asking, James cut in. Ava handles the finances. I agreed to let her use that account. I'm not asking whether you agreed, I said evenly. I'm asking why transactions were authenticated with my electronic signature at times when I was not logged in. The air shifted. Ava placed both hands on the table. The system could be mistaken. I asked the bank to verify login addresses, I replied. They did not originate from my home. James looked at Ava. For the first time that evening, his confidence faded. I continued, voice low and steady. I have also paused all trust fund disbursements. James half stood from his chair. You can't do that. I can, I said. I established the trust. Ava straightened. You're trying to control us. I'm controlling my assets, I answered. Beside me, Sarah remained silent. I felt her hand tighten gently under the table, but she didn't speak. I took out another envelope. The apartment you're living in, I said, is still under my name. The internal lease expired 3 months ago. James stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. You're kicking us out. I'm ending the ambiguity, I replied. I've filed notice to reclaim occupancy. You have 60 days to arrange your next steps. Ava stepped back. You can't do this over a misunderstanding. I'm not acting on misunderstanding, I said. I'm acting on pattern. I didn't add more words. I simply unlocked the tablet already on the table. A short recording played. Ava's voice. Clear. Unhurried. He'll never check closely. James trusts me. Just a few more months and it's done. No shouting. No threats. Just calculation. James went pale. Ava, he whispered. That's not the full context, she said quickly. I have the full version, I replied. So does my attorney. I didn't look at James when I spoke next. I've submitted a formal verification request to the bank. If there are signs of forgery, they'll proceed according to policy. Ava's voice rose. You're destroying this family. I stayed seated. Families aren't destroyed by reviewing records. They're destroyed by dishonesty. James sank back into his chair, hands covering his face. I had never seen him like that. No longer the confident man demanding $15,000 for a retreat. Just a grown child realizing he didn't fully understand the world around him. Why didn't you tell me? He asked Ava quietly. She didn't answer. I didn't interfere. This was no longer a conversation between me and them. It was a collision between trust and reality. After several heavy minutes, I said the final words I had prepared for that night. I'm not calling the police. I'm not making a public spectacle. I am simply closing what I no longer control. I slid a document toward them. Repayment of the improper transfers within 60 days, or full legal process. Ava stared at the paper. James looked at me. Dad, you don't trust me anymore, he asked. I answered slowly. I trust evidence. No one spoke for several minutes. The wall clock continued its steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. Finally, Ava picked up her purse. We're leaving, she said to James. He stood more slowly. At the door, James turned back to look at me. There was no defiance in his eyes now, only confusion. The door closed. The house returned to silence. Sarah let out a soft breath, as if she had been holding it all evening. I sat down and looked at the stack of papers still on the table. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt something had been placed where it belonged. And for the first time since that night in the hospital, I knew that whatever came next, I was no longer standing alone in the dark of uncertainty. After that night, the house in Houston felt too big. No unexpected doorbells, no urgent calls demanding money, just silence. But it was a different kind of silence than the one in the hospital. That silence made me feel helpless. This one made me think. The bank completed its verification a few weeks later. Some transactions were confirmed as improperly authenticated. My attorney sent a formal notice requesting repayment. I didn't make anything public. I didn't tell the neighbors. I didn't need an audience. James called 3 days after that dinner. His voice was no longer tense. I went through everything he said. I didn't realize it had gone that far. I didn't ask how much he had known. I simply said, knowing late is still better than not knowing. Ava wasn't part of the calls after that. I heard she moved out of the apartment before the 60 days were up. Divorce papers were filed a few weeks later. I didn't celebrate. I didn't grieve. An adult marriage belongs to the adults in it. James sold the car he had bought the year before. He moved into a smaller apartment, closer to work. Credit card debt, the kind I never knew existed, began surfacing as he handled things on his own. He sent me a long email, not asking for money, just an apology. I read every word. I didn't reply right away. At this age, I understand that an apology can be a beginning. Change takes time. Meanwhile, Sarah recovered slowly but steadily. She practiced walking step by step with a support frame. Every walk down the hospital corridor looked like a lesson in patience. One afternoon, as we sat by the window, watching sunlight spill across the parking lot, she said quietly, I don't want to spend the rest of our years here. I knew she was thinking about Florida, the small, coastal town we visited 2 years ago. The White House just a few minutes' walk from the water. I had kept a copy of the deposit agreement back then, but delayed it thinking James still needed us close. This time I didn't delay. I put the Houston house on the market. Not rushed, but firm. I let go of most of what we didn't truly need. Decades of accumulated things felt lighter when I looked at them differently. James came one weekend to help us pack. He didn't say much, but he worked hard. When he carried a box of books toward the truck, he paused in front of the family photo hanging in the living room. I didn't understand how much you and Mom did, he said quietly. I looked at him for a moment. You don't need to understand the past, I replied. You just need to live the present honestly. We didn't hug, but something between us felt less tight. When the moving truck left Houston, I looked back at the city where I had worked for 40 years. I didn't feel like I was abandoning anything. I felt like I was choosing again. The house in Florida is much smaller. No wide living room, No two-car garage. But in the morning, I can hear the waves from the back porch. Sarah loves that. Every afternoon, we walk along the shoreline. Her steps are still slow, but steady. I walk beside her. Not to hold her up, just to share the rhythm. James calls from time to time. Not for money, just to talk about a new job, about learning to manage his finances himself. Once he told me he had enrolled in an evening business course. Paying the tuition myself, he said. There was a hint of pride in his voice. Good, I answered. I don't send more money, but I don't close the door either. We set clear boundaries. And when boundaries are clear, relationships stop bending out of shape. One evening, as the sun lowered into the water, Sarah took my hand. Do you regret it? She asked. I thought for a moment. I regret not setting limits sooner, I said. But I don't regret loving my son, she smiled. The ocean breeze lifted her hair gently. I realized what I had learned wasn't how to punish someone. It was how to protect myself, without losing my dignity. Loving your children is instinct, but unlimited tolerance can distort both sides. We kept walking along the sand, leaving parallel footprints behind us. No more midnight calls asking for money. No more rushed transfers made out of fear of disappointing our child. Just two older people stepping into a quieter chapter of life, not because nothing happened, but because we chose to face it and put it in order. And this time I am not standing alone in any cold hallway. I am standing beside my wife, the ocean in front of us, and behind us a lesson that cost enough to finally understand. If my story makes you reflect on family, on boundaries, and on how we love without losing ourselves, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel. A like or a share helps this story reach someone who might need it. And it allows me to keep telling more stories, slowly, honestly, and with meaning. Thank you for staying until the end. I wish you a peaceful evening with the people who truly value you.